right, this week we are going to speak to Nick Ciontea, a young and relatively new visual artist who really burst on the scene quickly. He was one of the first people I knew that embraced the modular video process, used the opportunity to start working with people really quickly, and went from sort of being nobody to being a really important artist in a blink of an eye. So we kind of talk about that and how he was able to get started so quickly. Here you go. Thanks a lot for taking some time today and speaking with us. I'm really anxious to have people kind of hear your story because I know a very small part of it, but also because you are really pushing some envelopes in the world of visual stuff. Why don't you tell us a little bit, first of all, about the kind of gigs that you do and you have been doing?
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, I primarily function as a video artist. Coming from an audio modular kind of background. So I leaped onto the bandwagon when LZX Industries started up. And I think I had a system, and I probably did a show that first week that I had it put together, just down the street in Chicago, where some producers were just probably doing a beat show. And, you know, it was something that that's kind of why I bought it, is why I got into the LZX, was to go out and perform, because I wasn't really doing that with music, and I just wanted to be a little bit more involved in the scene. Over time, I've just continued on that path. It's been, I don't know, 3 years at least since that time frame. And at this point, I do a fair amount of content design at home for tours that travel around the world without me. I do festival residencies where I have my own stage within a music festival, and then I will produce video on the spot, or, you know, work with artists ahead of time to have their logos. Really kind of depends on what kind of music's happening and what kind of festival it is. And then also I have a number of bands that I go out and perform in real time with. And so as far as the art goes, that would probably cover most of it. Here and there, a few music videos. But to me, that just seems like the same type of content that I would make for a tour.
Sure. Boy, that already gives us a bunch of interesting things to talk about. But as you may know from my other podcasts, one of the things I'm desperately interested in is to find out how people become the artists that they have become. And I'd like to know a little bit about your background. Why don't you tell us, as you said that you came to the visual work from audio modulars, but there had to be some precursor to that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got here?
Yeah, there definitely was. I mean, I had very small amounts of cinematography in high school. My dad is an AV, he's a technology teacher, which always meant you had a little bit of AV in you. I wouldn't say, I think I was always interested in video or film. Back then, I never knew the difference between these things. But I think I got my first camcorder when I was in college, and that was mostly to document the band that we had playing in our living room. So it wasn't really so much of a creative output as it was a documentation. I think I always hoped it would become a creative output. You know, the more gear I can have lying around, I always feel the more creative I can be.
Of course.
But I certainly, I mean, even when I came up and you were my teacher for that week in Madison, and we got a little taste of Jitter that week. And, you know, even then, it was something I was definitely interested in. I think that opened my eyes a lot, even though that didn't end up being the route, you know, just opening my eyes more to the realm of possibilities in creating video and more generative style concepts.
Yeah, so when I said that I kind of knew some of your background, it's because we did first meet at a Max MSP Jitter workshop up in Madison.
Yeah.
And you had you kind of came up there with your entourage.
Yeah, we had three of us.
Yeah, it was, and you guys were hungry. You were hungry to learn stuff and try stuff and take flyers on things. And I was really encouraged by that, just because, in my experience, people that are hungry, whether they become Max MSP heads or not, is irrelevant. What they are going to do is they're going to be exploring the edges of the media art stuff, and that always really excites me. Now, my question for you is, what? So you had a little bit of cinematography and stuff in your background. What is that the first time that you had actually done any stuff where you were edging into real-time video work? Or had you
Yeah.
done some other experiments before that?
I mean, really, even editing. Prior to having a video synthesizer, the most that I had done to edit video was put one clip in front of another and hit export. So even in terms of creatively using a computer with pre-made footage, certainly real time, no, I'd never touched anything. It was really all a landslide, like the minute that I got into the LZX.
Sure. Now, the LZX stuff, first of all, is a little bit hard to come by, and secondly, is pretty expensive. So it seems to me like you must have had some inkling that there was a future in this for you. I mean, how is it that you knew, or didn't you know? Maybe you just wanted to take a flyer. I don't know. How did you get into it?
Man, I think I absolutely knew. The first time I saw one hooked up, and I just thought about how, at the time I probably had 12U of Eurorack, so I had a decent audio system sitting around at home. And, all the building blocks of audio synthesis were quite understood at that time already. And, just looking at the layout and watching someone turn knobs, it was Johnny Woods had come out to Chicago. And that night, I was just like, envelope follower and 2 modules, and you're done. I mean, it seemed so simple to me. And I guess like the concepts, I've really been able to translate like the audio concepts to the video world very well. I think like the user base for the LZX is very diverse. A lot of people come from just video backgrounds, not knowing much about synthesizers. And I'm completely on the other side. Like I came in fully knowing about synthesizers, but not a thing about video. So it was a lot of experimentation. Like I said, I cut my teeth doing those shows down the street here in Chicago for a long time. And it was just me going in and doing generative stuff while, people brought in their laptops and played the stuff they were producing at home. And you very slowly, I've gone through a lot of phases, camera feedback has always been big, and it's very easy to set up some optical feedback loops and make things look really pretty. So off the bat, I was doing a lot of keen, a lot of flat colors. These days, I'm not really doing any flat colors. I'm much more into the gradients, and there's like generative versus processing. There's just so many routes to go in terms of like how to use the LZX that, it's just been 3 years of tinkering and trying to get myself out of the old habits and the old ways of patching things and trying to go into, at least new for me, regardless of whatever everyone else is possibly doing.
Sure. Now, to what extent do you think that taking a path with visuals opened you up to a lot more opportunity than if you would have been a musician? So it seems like, and maybe this is just because I do a little of both, but I kind of think of myself mostly as a musician. It seems like everybody claims to be a musician, but not that many people feel comfortable calling themselves video artists, and so there actually ends up being more opportunity if you're willing to say, yeah, I'm a video artist, let me do your gig. Do you find that to be the case?
Absolutely.
Because if I recall, you have played or worked with some pretty big groups in the short time that you've been doing the video work.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate, especially with some of my content work from home. Um, a lot of that, some of those are even like coming through kind of like the same person and the same connection. I work very closely with lighting designers on that level for the kind of acts we're talking about. And the production designer and lighting designer who kind of will design a tour. Hopefully he keeps getting good tours and we can keep building more successful relationships.
Yeah, that's cool.
But definitely, I mean, even just on a local sense, I could be doing video 5 nights a week.
Right.
And that would be, I mean, I'm not saying it would be worth my time, but it's available and people want it.
Where if you're a guitar player, that's not necessarily the case.
No, not at all. And also in the sense that, like, I go out to shows without, depending on the show, I mean, I go out to a lot of shows where there's no concept or rehearsed imagery. I'm just going to go up there and kind of jive off what their sound is to one extent or the other. There's only a few bands that I'll really like work out a lot of stuff ahead of time, or a few like contracts where it's like a multi-night thing,
right?
And I'm playing more production manager role than a improvised video artist.
Sure.
So for me, it's just like going out there and plugging a bunch of stuff in, and acting like I'm in my room, but getting different types of material to work around to hopefully, make me make that left turn instead of the right turn or whatever.
Sure. Now, to what extent does having the analog front end, to what extent is that important for sort of this live gigging thing where you have to be able to literally produce a lot of stuff off the cuff? Does the analog kind of help with that?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, I very typically, and for a lot of different kinds of looks and shows that I'll be going out and doing in real time, there are a number of, like, I try to have the biggest playbook of easy patches. Minimal patch cables, definitely like minimal patch cables just to get the image up, and then modulations can come later kind of thing. But because I want to be able to take those 10 seconds between songs and basically either have a fader on my output and have 2 patches kind of running, or be able to rip 4 cables up and put 4 new ones back down and kind of have a base level. It's depending on the show. I mean, once again, like a rock show versus some type of more ambient or drone style show, experimental. A rock show, I want to like change looks a lot. And it's very hard to program a very massive patch to do a 10-song rock set.
Sure, that makes sense.
Whereas if I'm playing with people who are doing, flutes and organs and drones and synthesizers, I can just sit there on a very large patch and turn knobs endlessly and have everything seem a little bit different, but in a much more flowing way. And it's not as much of like the chaotic switching gears of that rock-based show.
Sure. Now, with your stuff, do you use any digital equipment at all, or is everything analog feeds?
I do sets that I call analog sets, which would be just the LZX straight to the projector.
Okay.
And I really enjoy doing those. Those are going to be purely generative. And those I'll do for a lot more of the more psychedelic and or ambient styles.
Sure.
And then my camcorder is technically digital. So anytime I add a camera, which is like the first thing I would add onto the rig for a live show would be my camera and a tripod. Mm-hmm. After that, I would possibly add an iPad for clip playback. Basically, just like a VCR computer that's a little bit more portable.
Right.
And then I also have a laptop that I can do. I have like a scan converter, and that goes into RGB, and I can put another color source into the synth that way. If I, for for something of an all-nighter or a festival residency, I would have my laptop around just for the hard drive space for processing clips. But, you know, I don't know. I try to stay away from processing clips, but it definitely happens, and it has to happen for very long-running shows.
But generally speaking, when you have a digital synth or a digital source, you're primarily using it as an updated version of a VCR, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm not using the effects rarely. If anything, I'll slap the old mirror on something for an electronic for some type of like DJ. You know, they're all into the certain looks, and I can certainly make some of those looks happen.
Right.
But yeah, mostly just triggering things that I've collected off of, you know, Vimeo or wherever else, or even motion. I mean, you met Matt. He did the class with us up in Madison, and Matt makes motion graphics for me. So we have little powwows around the computer and make little weird things, and then I'll process those further. A lot of times I actually I'll make generative things at home and then just reprocess those live.
Sure. Okay. Now, I was going to also ask, when I've seen your material in the past, and I will post up some links so that other people can check out what you've done as well. But there are two very distinct classes of things that you do. One of them is clearly generative within the system, even though, I don't know, there's probably potential for source material coming from elsewhere. But then there's another, which is like processed video feeds or live feeds. Which of those do you find more engaging for yourself? I mean, if we're just talking about what you love doing.
So at like a live show?
No, just for yourself. I mean, if you were stuck on a desert island, if you were stuck on a desert island, would you, and told you could only do one kind of material, would you focus on the generative or would you focus on the processing?
I'd probably definitely focus on the generative. I need a whole lot of oscillators.
Yeah. Well, because I'm wondering to what extent that ends up seeming sort of limiting.
See, I think it's actually the other way around. But ultimately, they're kind of the same. I mean, anything you do generatively is still what you're going to do when you're processing. So if I just make some really nasty pattern and it's really wavy and psychedelic and kind of melting and has a lot of nice colors, you know, essentially when you're processing, you would still just be making that pattern and then like filling in some keyed area with that design or making some type of textural change with that other generative item. So they always work hand in hand. I just think that, to me, when I work with footage, like I can't handle staring at that footage any more than like the first couple times I use it, and then I'm sick of looking at it. Sure. I mean, sure, I can make it different colors, and I can do it black and blue for this band because they're evil, and I can do it rainbows for this other band because they're garage rock psychedelia. But I see the same thing every time. I'm just like, okay, I've used that clip enough. I don't want to see that imagery anymore.
Right.
Whereas generative stuff is also what I feel when people tell me, they're like, I've never seen anything like this, and I'll be like, I just had the worst show of my life. They're like, it was amazing. Like, I've never seen anything like it. And I think that just comes from that style of, generating patterns with lines and bent lines, and then adding color. I think people are used to seeing maybe rainbow static style distortions and video, and they're used to seeing a lot of clip-based video, but these video synthesizers and their pattern work is very much, I think, outside of what most people have ever seen in the background of a show.
Right. Well, it's interesting you say that because I just recently had a conversation with a friend about the resolume software package and how it often seems like when you go to a show where people use resolume, that you can kind of tell that it was a resolume show because there are things that software kind of does very easily and other things that it doesn't do quite so easily. And so, assuming you're in a rush to get a show done, you're going to do the easy stuff, and it's going to have a tendency to speak like the last person that was in a hurry, you know?
Absolutely. And anyone who knows these software packages or even these synthesizers, I can look at people's video synth patches and be like, there's a lot of filter in this, or there's, this or that type of composition going on. And the same thing is, when you know that software package, certainly there's all those easy outs and presets. But in that way, I guess that's how probably some of the best resolume users are separating themselves, is by not letting you know just how they're doing what they're doing.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely. Because I've seen some people that were doing startling work, and then I found out, they were using resolume too. And it was like, interesting. And that's where the art comes into it, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's having the patience to turn that software package into your easel, which I've always had a harder time than sitting in front of a bunch of knobs. So like that experimental phase where you're learning and teaching yourself and finding your hidden tricks and your real like flavor and style, that's very hard for me to do in a software package. I try and I'm continuing to try, but it's definitely my weak side.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. To what extent is it that the thing that's important about the analog system isn't necessarily just its analog nature, but also the fact that the way you approach it is very different from the way you approach software? I mean, you sit there and you look at a screen with some knobs in your hand and you try and do something interesting.
Yeah. I think actually, I agree 100%. I mean, that's how I learn, and that's how I've been able to be more proficient with learning on the system. But the video synth more so, I feel, than like audio and things like that. There's always the arguments of, plugins versus hardware and computers and modulars and all these different ways of going at things. The one thing that I actually think the video, like having an analog video synthesizer, is so amazing at is like its bandwidth capabilities. To do for certain types of shows or even photo shoots that I've done, I can run currently in my LZX, I can bring in 7 live cameras and process them as hard as I want and have a stable output in real time.
Oh, sure. It's not going to choke at you at all.
Yeah. You need those new crazy Mac Pros with like 12, or you need like a very, very heavy core computer to be kind of pulling in that many camera feeds and simultaneously processing all of them. Right. So I also, Austin SAIC Fest is one of the festivals that I go to every year, and I've spent entire sets where I am like not even providing imagery for a show, but I'm like the mixer between 2 oil guys, a feedback guy, and a computer guy. And they're all coming into my synth, and I'm just divvying up the screen in kind of in a more melty, keyed, multi-view way. Mm-hmm. And like that's my entire job. So it's just handling feeds and sending them out to the projector or the wall.
Yeah, that seems like an awful lot of fun. I mean, if you think of sort of like all of the available AV tech jobs that come with any kind of a festival or a show, that probably being the person who's responsible for the melty in between is probably one of the better jobs, right?
Yeah, it's enjoyable, very much so. I was using the one guy who's doing live oils and the dishes, and then I just use him to like create the outlines and the masks of different areas. And then I can like put a different person in each one of those areas. It definitely, that eats up my entire synth. There's probably not really room for me to make any imagery with the amount of patch that's going on there.
Right.
But it's just another way to use the synth that, kind of opens your eyes when you actually have the ability or the people around you to experiment with.
Well, that's cool. Now, one thing I want to talk about a little bit is the analog synth that you use. So you primarily use most of your work is done using LZX modules. This is what provides the manipulation of the video. But you make some of your own modules too, right?
I do. I make a number of small utility modules that just fill in right between the LZX modules. Liz has helped me along the way. Everything from my first board designs through to manufacturing and graphic design. So I definitely owe it all to her for teaching me how productive I can be. But yeah, I make a small mixer, 4-channel mixer, attenuator, a 3-channel VCA, an interpolating scanner, and I'm currently working on a dual 4-quadrant multiplier.
Do you use any like standard modular modules as well?
I do. I have some make noise pressure points that are scaled down to 1 volt in my system. I actually don't use them entirely that much, but I'm always very happy that they are there. And I used to have a brains on there as well for sequencing, but LZX ended up releasing a sequencer at one point, so I phased that out. And I have a WMD phase displacement oscillator, which is my favorite audio oscillator in the video world, because it's you can phase out each of the, it has like 1 core frequency, but you can phase out 4 different versions of it. And then you can CV that phase difference. So in a picture style way, you know, I can start creating a lot more like cyclical events by doing like 90-degree phase shifts. There's a lot of opportunity with phase displacement in video.
Sure. That sounds pretty awesome, actually. I hadn't really thought about it. I always wondered what that PDO was, what its calling card was, and you just kind of helped me understand that a little bit better. That's cool. So when you do a gig, then how big is the modular system that you take?
I fly around with and take out locally a 12U.
Okay.
Full mono rocket.
How do you, when you fly somewhere, what's your packing? I have to admit,
Yeah.
I actually bought one of those tip-top Station 252s because it was the biggest thing I could find that would fit in overhead on an airplane. I am terrified of putting a modular in the guts of a plane. And I'll tell you a story. Not that long ago, it was like when I was just starting to get some calls to travel for playing and stuff. I was on a plane somewhere for work, and we were sort of like standing. We weren't quite ready to pull into the gate where we were going to offload. So I'm sitting there, and it's been a long fight, and I'm grumpy anyway, and I'm thinking that, I have it worse than anyone, right? And then I'm sitting there, and I look out the window, and out the window is like an American Airlines plane. And they have the luggage bay door open, but they don't have that little slide thing connected to it. But the internal conveyor belt is belching out luggage. And this stuff is just like squirting out and falling 25 feet to the ground. And I looked at that, and then that became the image in my head of how I can't ever imagine putting one of these valuable and what would be very hard to put together again systems into the belly of a plane. What do you do to prepare for that?
I've always been able to put mine in the overhead. I have the monorocket MX-104. I think there's a very, very, very small amount of planes that might say it doesn't fit. It's always had way more than enough room everywhere I've ever taken it. I put it under the seat in front of me, and I put it in the overhead.
Hold
on. Outside of that, I don't like baggage at all.
This is a 12U system, so it's like 4 layers of modules?
Yeah.
By how long?
104.
104 HP. So that's significantly bigger than my thing, and my thing doesn't seem to, it just barely fits in
Sure.
full size. How are you jamming this in? Do you do the whole thing where it's like, it's a musical instrument, I'm allowed
No,
to?
never. No, but I would play that card
You would.
absolutely if I had to. No,
It just has worked, huh?
it's like within a half inch of dimensions for just about everything I've ever looked at. It's always like 19 by, oh man, I can't remember the numbers. It's like 22 by, what's the overall? 22 by 14 by something. But yeah, it fits. I actually always pack a screwdriver in my pack.
Right.
So I fly somewhere and I'll either ship things or like find other ways of getting some gear down.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't like to check anything. So I typically cram as much stuff as I can in my backpack.
Right.
And that includes a screwdriver, which I'll take the rubber feet off of the synth.
Oh, so if you
That
just...
kind of buys me an inch on the side almost.
Right.
Because I almost had an issue coming back from the Muff Wiggler opening. And she was like, that doesn't fit. I'm like, clearly it kind of fits. She just, it was a bad day for her or something. So so I took the feet off and then it was no big deal. But yeah, it's rough flying with the stuff, but sometimes that's how I choose what I'm going to end up bringing. It's like, what can I fit? I pack my clothing in my modular case.
Oh, wow.
So, between the folds of the modules, I have like 2 pairs of underwear and some socks.
Right.
And then when I go through TSA, and of course they have to give me the bomb check, they got to go through all my clean laundry on the way there and dirty laundry on the way home.
Right. Well, good for them.
Right.
That's interesting. I was curious because I knew that you'd done some traveling, but I had no idea how you were, and especially since your system is all LZX, which means it would be next to impossible to replace it quickly if you had to.
Yeah, that would be very hard.
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit about something I'm curious about, just from a practical standpoint. Again, I know a fair number of people who've done live work, but I've known very few of them that have been able to show me much of their work, simply because it seems like the process of digitizing it or capturing it in any way seems to be very difficult to do a good job on, but also just is sort of like runs counter to the idea of doing live and totally idiosyncratic visuals, right? Now, you said that some of the work that you do is this content creation at home that you give to people who are going to tour with it without you. That implies that you have gotten pretty good at digitizing this work, or at least people think you've gotten pretty good at it. What is the process you do to take this real-time performance, even if it's in your home, you're doing a real-time performance? How do you capture that effectively, as digitized media?
Essentially, you just, you need a nice video input card. I think it mostly kind of comes down to Matrox. I have a Matrox Mini or MX02 Mini. That's like a $500, $600 video input device. Everything from HDMI, components, S-video, composites, and then there's also like Blackmagic Design. Makes a series of video input related devices.
But the Blackmagic stuff is kind of wickedly expensive, isn't it?
Actually, they can get you into a computer cheaper than my Matrox.
Oh, really?
And they all have probably their own benefits in a lot of ways, and for things that I don't necessarily use them for. I solely use these devices as capture cards, whereas they're kind of, I think, more or less designed and manufactured to be working in a studio and to be doing full monitoring and a lot more like video out and coordination with various software suites, whether it's Adobe Premiere, Final Cut, or whatever's going on. That's absolutely, like, I just don't use them for that kind of stuff. All I do is try and get the best up converted signal out of my synth which these days I'm actually taking a 720 signal, or I'm turning my analog composite signal and capturing it into a 720p signal.
Right.
And I can do 1080, but to me, the 720 is just looking a lot better.
Interesting.
There's so many settings and codecs you can go through and really try and capture to. I capture to Apple ProRes, I believe, on the input, and then at a 720 because, like I said, I just feel there's a little less artifact than the 1080 stuff. But there's also issue. I'm running a whole lot of like asynchronous strobes in a lot of my patches and phased out strobes, and none of these video cards have been engineered with our video art community in mind. They're kind of looking for very stable, more or less what everyone else would be putting into the computer to capture. So it's the same thing when we upload to Vimeo and YouTube. Sometimes it's just like horrendous what ends up being shown in terms of like what I've captured or what I saw live in my bedroom, just because all these internet codecs, once again, were not like designed with a person who wants to give you epilepsy seizures in mind.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm just capturing things into my computer. I capture at about a gig a minute. So for any given like tour content run, or if I'm working on like a music video, or right now, like I'm working on an entire album of music videos, it's really hard for me and my resources, aka bad computer, to be able to handle like all that information at any given time, because I can capture 300 gigs worth of video in 3 beers,
right?
4 beers. So if I'm really like running at it and I'm just sitting in front of my synth taking takes, which is a lot of times what I do for content, is I'll take, I really like, once again, just adapting other things that I learned in the audio world, and that whole West Coast style and Buchla and the randomness and the uncertainty. And I try to like think of myself as doing a lot of that kind of stuff in video. Phase relationships, like I've already talked about, is something I'm currently really, really big into. And the other things would be, I'll take a take of a song with a little bit of an audio reaction, and then I'll go back through and I'll just take the exact same take again on the exact same patch, but it's not running the same. And the oscillators are in different positions, and the oscillators are free running, they're not synced. And, maybe I'm using a room mic and not a direct audio feed. So like where I'm sitting in the room is going to change which harmonics are getting through to that mic. But there's so many tiny, small inconsistencies that then I can like blend those two together, and they'll end up being, sometimes 10 times more interesting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, like you say, that really does kind of give a nod back to how you interact with a West Coast type synth, which is you sort of embrace the fact that nothing's reproducible.
Yeah,
that's cool. So, where do you see yourself going from here? I mean, you've talked about how over the last 3 years, your eye and your perspective and the things that you do have changed a bit. Where are you going from here?
Oh man. I'm doing a lot of work at the School of the Art Institute, where we have one of the original Sandine image processors. So I'm spending a lot of time playing with it and getting like their new media department up and running. We have them actually for the first time this semester getting HD captures out of a Sandine. We have full color input on it, and they're actually made the pre-order for the new LZX core today. So I'm having a lot of fun down here. I do workshops at the college. I really like education. I think it's obviously fun to share the story, and to especially to be in a school setting where kids are trying to learn about this stuff, and to be able to be involved with that. I think that's pretty awesome. Other than that, I'm just gonna, keep hoping that people keep ringing my bell and asking for collaborations and work to be done. I don't really see much changing. I think I think the system will probably get bigger. We'll have new tools out, and I'll probably grow into some new phases. I think LZX is going to probably go digital in the year 2015 with like frame buffers. So that's something I think we've all been looking forward to a very long time. I'm actually really big into the idea of trying to focus on some audio again. I'm making a move to the south side of Chicago into a large recording studio, and I'm going to be surrounded by a lot more musicians. I'm also rebuilding up my liquid light show rig. So kind of liquid light show and audio are going to try and be my theme going into fall and early winter.
Yeah, I hope that people get a chance to see some of your work in action. Everything I've seen of it looks great, and I would really love to see a live show where you're doing some of this work, and it seems pretty exciting. Now, you say that you're working with this with school that's SAIC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't realize they had a Sandine. That's pretty awesome. What is it you're learning from playing with the Sandine that makes you that opens your eyes in a different way?
I guess it more or less opens your eyes to how good of a job Liz and Ed have done designing the LZX and how much they've studied some of this older stuff. Things are a lot more building block in nature, even more so. Like I think LZX does a really good job of keeping things on the building block level, but even just like keying and masking and making a true keyer, which is like combining a comparator and a VCA. You know, on the Sandine, you have to do that all like piece by piece, whereas the LZX just makes everything easy just because of switchable jacks, normalizations, not being on BNC cables.
Right.
It's just it's kind of like a whole different beast in a lot of ways, even though you're doing the same exact kind of concepts. I've definitely thought more about mixing in a lot of different ways because of the way the Sandine has its mixers laid out. But ultimately, it's just fun, I think. Like, I just love using it, standing in front of it. The color palette is a little different, just in those like very slight vibrancies. And, I don't know. It's really hard to tell. But for a lot of the things that I like to do, it's not nearly capable. Like it's oscillator frequency modulation and sync, like those circuits have come a long ways. So making the very complex and very angular and perfectly round curves and waves and things that I make in the LZX, I can't really do on the Sandine. It's kind of a little too maybe slightly distorted or
just cruder, huh?
Yeah, it's not going to pull off some of that stuff as well. But, it's 50 years old,
right.
So or darn near close. So we'll give it a pass.
We'll give it a break, right? One thing, though, that I think a lot of people would be curious about, because, and this is especially useful in talking to you about it because it's a relatively recent occurrence for you, which is getting started. If somebody came to you and said, hey, I really want to get started in this stuff, I love it, it speaks to me, I want to do it, what would you say would be a good way to dip a toe in and to get started in the process?
With an emphasis on like analog video,
I'm just thinking more in terms of like doing live visual art.
Sure, live visual art, I think there's absolutely no hesitation required. When it's as simple as having a laptop or a eBay/Craigslist video mixer and some VCRs, the various amount of circuit bent items that are out there in the world. These might not be the looks that you are going for, but you can definitely make looks. And there's always someone who wants some looks. So, being able to do it is unquestionably easy. Finding people who would want some video art and who are willing to give you a chance, especially if you're in a big city. I guess I'm really talking like, I live in Chicago, so there are a lot of bands that would love to have video art.
Right.
Maybe it's different somewhere else, and certainly in a smaller city. But I mean, other than that, it's actually just it's a pretty big bummer because it becomes money. You know, you gotta have gotta have some gear. You have, especially if you're starting out. Most places don't have projectors. Like most venues don't have projectors.
Right.
So I mean, I've gone through at least 4 projectors, probably more, and I have 2 currently, and I also have a various size and assortment of mounts for these projectors. I have mic stand mounts. I have tripods. It's all like having the gear to do the show, which you can do cheaply, but the projector is usually kind of the hard one. That and a screen. So I think I bought a screen for like $120, and I typically buy about a $500 projector. After that, most things you kind of like go on the cheap and buy. Old Panasonic video mixers can be bent. They can do a lot of fun stuff. They can do a lot of feedback. A video camera will give you optical feedback. Now you have a source. Add in a really janky DVD player or VCR. Now you got 2 sources. So 2 sources and feedback. You're well on your way to a show.
All right. Well, that sounds like some great advice, and also a way to get into it without having to mortgage your mom's house in order to pull it off. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I sold my entire 12U of audio to get my first, 3 or 1 row of video, basically.
Right.
3U.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an investment.
It is. But if it gives you an opportunity, I mean, that's something that sometimes is hard to get in the art world. So that's cool. And I'm really glad for you because, again, when we first met, I know that you were really searching for something. And like I said, you were hungry. And then I saw you kind of latch into the modular video thing, and you tore into it like a tiger. It was really exciting to watch you. So congratulations on that.
Hey, thank you, and thanks for having me. We have a great supportive community in the video synthesis area of Muff Wiggler, and also a Facebook group called Video Circuits, where a lot of us hang out, and it's it's easy to tear into it when you got a lot of people interested in the same thing.
I guess so. That is true, and it's one of the things that to me is fantastic about the internet is the ability to find, no matter what kind of community you want to join, it's probably sitting out there just waiting for you to show up. So that's great. Well, thanks, Nick, so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
All right, bye. And there you have it, another podcast in the bag. If that doesn't inspire you to follow your passion and take it on and have it run its course for you, I don't know what will. I want to thank everyone for their listenership and for keeping the podcast number strong. It's really great to see this thing continue to grow based on number of users and listeners. And I'm going to keep on cranking them out. It's a lot of fun for me as well. I am learning an amazing amount. I hope you are too. Well, looks like the dog's coming to get my attention, so I have to head out. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next week.